for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. I would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order, and it is a privilege to work alongside them. Thank you.
And that is the voice of Special Counsel Jack Smith, who has unsealed yet another indictment against Donald Trump. This has been a great week, and I love this. Welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I am Darren Gibson, your host today. We also have to talk about more charges in Michigan, this time having to do with illegally seizing voting machines. And one of the accused is the Michigan Republican Attorney General candidate from 2022. So we'll talk about that. We have to talk about the possibility of the United Auto Workers Union striking. So we'll discuss what might happen there. We have an update to a story we told you about last week involving the effort to oust 8 Michigan legislators, 6 Democrats, 2 Republicans. So we have an update to those efforts. And we have a double hammer time this week, including, for the first time ever, we give a Hammer Time Award to a dead politician. We'll tell you who that is and why they earned it in just a couple of minutes. Also, as Ottawa County turns, so you don't want to miss this. It's a full show today. Before we get started with today's topics, I just want to remind you that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can find us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio, and you can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. Again, a reminder, Stitcher is shutting down at the end of August, so please, if you listen through Stitcher, we recommend either Apple Podcast or Spreaker. We send links to our Facebook, X, YouTube, Mastodon, and Tumblr accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us there. Let's go ahead with our first story, Donald Trump's latest indictment. This is Eric Tucker and Michael Kunzelman writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 2nd out of Washington. Donald Trump was indicted on felony charges Tuesday for working to overturn the results of the 2020 election in the run-up to the violent riot by his supporters at the U.S. Capitol, with the Justice Department acting to hold him accountable for an unprecedented effort to block the peaceful transfer of presidential power and threaten American democracy. The four-count indictment, the third criminal case against Trump, provided deeper insight into a dark moment that has already been the subject of exhaustive federal investigations and captivating public hearings. It chronicles a months-long campaign of lies about the election results and says that, even when those falsehoods resulted in a chaotic insurrection at the Capitol, Trump sought to exploit the violence by pointing to it as a reason to further delay the counting of votes that sealed his defeat. Even in a year of rapid succession legal reckonings for Trump, Tuesday's indictment with charges including conspiring to defraud the United States government that he once led was stunning in its allegations that Trump assaulted the bedrock function of democracy. They say former president. We don't refer to Trump as former president on this show. It's the first time Trump, who is the early frontrunner for next year's Republican presidential nomination, is facing legal consequences for his frantic but ultimately failed effort to cling to power. I'm going to skip down a little bit because you've already heard Jack Smith's comments. The Trump campaign called the charges fake and asked why it took 2.5 years to bring them. Well, when you got to wade through so much paperwork and interviews and evidence, it's going to take a while. Got news for you, folks. Trump was the only person charged in Tuesday's indictment, but prosecutors obliquely referenced a half-dozen co-conspirators, including lawyers inside and outside of government who they said had worked with Trump to undo the election results. By the way, some of the names being thrown around include Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani. And I'm going to love to see Giuliani in prison. I'm going to love that. They also advanced legally dubious schemes to enlist slates of fake electors in battleground states won by Democrat Joe Biden to falsely claim that Trump had actually won them. And that's something we've talked about with the Michigan fake electors the last couple of weeks. The indictment accuses Trump and his allies of trying to, quote, exploit the violence and chaos, end of quote, by calling lawmakers into the evening on January 6th to delay the certification of Biden's victory. Again, they refer to Trump as the defeated president. We never refer to Trump as president, defeated or otherwise. It also cites handwritten notes from former Vice President Mike Pence that give gravitas to Trump's relentless goading to reject the electoral votes. Pence, who is challenging Trump for the GOP presidential nomination, declined overtures from a House panel that investigated the insurrection and sought to avoid testifying before the special counsel. He appeared only after losing a court fight, with prosecutors learning that Trump in one conversation derided him as too honest to stop the certification. Because in Trump's world, if you're too honest, that's not good for him. You need to be as sneaky and as scummy as Trump is to be in his orbit. By the way, Donald Trump is due in court on Thursday. We're recording this show on Wednesday, August 2nd. If anything interesting comes out of the indictment tomorrow, we'll have it on this show. The court appearance is the first step in a legal process that will play out in a courthouse situated between the White House he once controlled and the Capitol his supporters once stormed. The case is already being dismissed by Trump and his supporters and even some of his rivals as just another politically motivated prosecution. Let me once again remind everybody that it was not the special prosecutor that brought these charges. It wasn't the Justice Department. It was a federal grand jury. 12 people looked at the evidence and said, yep, Donald Trump is worthy of being prosecuted for these crimes. Let me continue. Yet the case stems from one of the most serious threats to American democracy in modern history. Well, that's an understatement. It's so much, I'll just put it like this. It's so much of an understatement. If Trump had succeeded, there would be no democracy. There would no longer be this show on the air because I guarantee I'd be sitting in prison thanks to Donald Trump and his Nazis. I'm just telling you, folks, telling you the truth. And yes, they are Nazis. They are white supremacist nationalists, white nationalists, Nazi, the textbook definition. The indictment centers on the turbulent 2 months after the November 2020 election in which Trump refused to accept his loss and spread lies that victory was stolen from him. The turmoil resulted in the riot at the Capitol when Trump loyalists violently broke into the building, attacked officers, and disrupted the congressional counting of electoral votes. In between the election and the riot, Trump urged local election officials to undo voting results in their states, pressured Pence to halt the certification of electoral votes, and falsely claimed that the election had been stolen, a notion repeatedly rejected by judges. Yes, over 60 court cases said that Trump was a liar. 60 court cases. Prosecutors say among those lies were claims that more than 10,000 dead voters had voted in Georgia, along with tens of thousands of double votes in Nevada. Really? No, it's all crap. Each claim had been rebutted by courts or state or federal officials, according to the indictment. Prosecutors say Trump knew his claims of having won the election were false, but he, quote, repeatedly and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, to create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and to erode public faith in the administration of the election, end of quote. The document carefully outlined arguments that Trump has been making to defend his conduct, that he had every right to challenge the results, to use the courts, even to lie about it in the process. But in stark detail, the indictment outlines how Trump instead took criminal steps to reverse the clear verdict voters had rendered. The indictment had been expected since Trump said in mid-July that the Justice Department had informed him he was a target of its investigation. A bipartisan House committee that spent months investigating the run-up to the Capitol riot also recommended prosecuting Trump on charges including aiding an insurrection and obstructing an official proceeding. I'd go one step further, and I'd prosecute him for treason. The indictment includes charges of conspiring to defraud the U.S., conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding, obstructing an official proceeding, and violating a post-Civil War Reconstruction-era civil rights statute that makes it a crime to conspire to violate rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. In this case, the right to vote. The mounting criminal cases are unfolding in the heat of the 2024 race. A conviction in this case or any other would not prevent Trump from pursuing the White House or serving as president, though Trump as president could theoretically appoint an attorney general to dismiss the charges or potentially try to pardon himself. In New York, state prosecutors have charged Trump with falsifying business records about a hush money payoff to a porn actress before the 2016 election. The trial is set to begin in March. In Florida, the Justice Department has brought more than 36 felony counts accusing him of possessing classified documents after leaving the White House and concealing them from investigators. That trial begins in May. Prosecutors in Georgia are also investigating efforts by Trump and his allies to reverse his election loss to Biden there. The district attorney of Fulton County is expected to announce charging decisions within weeks. Let me add, if he's charged in Georgia and convicted, he can't get a pardon because it has to come from the state, not the feds, because it's a state charge, and he will do prison there. Smith's team has cast a broad net as part of his federal investigation, with his team questioning senior Trump administration officials, including Pence, before a grand jury in Washington. Prosecutors also interviewed election officials in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and other battleground states won by Biden, who were pressured by the Trump team to change voting results. Rudy Giuliani, a Trump lawyer who pursued post-election legal challenges, spoke voluntarily to prosecutors. Giuliani was not named in the indictment, but appears to match the description of one of the co-conspirators. A spokesman for Giuliani said Tuesday night that Trump had a good faith basis for the actions he took. Oh, really? You know? Oh, he had good faith. Bullshit! Attorney General Merrick Garland last year appointed Smith, an international war crimes prosecutor, who also led the Justice Department's public corruption section, as special counsel to investigate efforts to undo the election, as well as Trump's retention of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Although Trump has derided him as deranged and called him politically motivated, Smith's past experience includes overseeing significant prosecutions against high-profile Democrats. No, if you want deranged, Trump needs to look in the mirror at his orange self. Because it's called projection, folks. Seriously, look up projection in the dictionary when it comes to mental health. Projection and gaslighting, that's all Trump does, projection and gaslighting. The Justice Department's investigation began well before Smith's appointment, proceeding alongside several criminal probes into the rioters themselves. More than 1,000 people have been charged in connection with the insurrection, including some with seditious conspiracy. By the way, the judge that Trump is going to be in front of, that's going to hear this case, is one of the judges in D.C. that has been handing out harsher sentences to January 6 rioters than even the prosecutors want. You're not going to mess with her because she's going to drop the hammer on you. So since we're talking about the 2020 election, let's get to our next story. This is Joey Capoletti writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 1st out of Lansing. Somebody must have listened to last week's episode of Southpaws because action has taken place. Two Michigan allies of Donald Trump, including a former Republican state attorney general candidate, were charged in connection with an effort to illegally access and tamper with voting machines in the state after the 2020 election. That is according to a prosecutor's announcement on Tuesday. Attorney Matt DePerno was charged with undue possession of a voting machine and conspiracy, while Daire Renton, a former Republican state representative, was charged with conspiracy to commit undue possession of a voting machine and false pretenses. That's according to an indictment by special prosecutor and current Muskegon County prosecutor D.J. Hilson. Both were arraigned Tuesday afternoon, according to Richard Lynch, court administrator for Oakland County's 6th District. Michigan is just one of at least 3 states where prosecutors say people breached election systems while embracing and spreading Trump's lie that the 2020 election was stolen. DePerno, who was endorsed by Trump in an unsuccessful run for Michigan Attorney General last year, acknowledged in a statement that he was arraigned Tuesday, but his lawyer said that he, quote, categorically denies any wrongdoing, end of quote, and, quote, looks forward to the date when his innocence will be demonstrated in a court of law, end of quote. Well, he better be waiting for a while because they've got proof, buddy. A phone message was left Tuesday with a lawyer listed in court documents as representing Renton. I would love to know who these lawyers are because I would never do business with them. I would make it my personal mission to bankrupt these attorneys, to get them disbarred, to have them go do something else for a living, something that's actually helpful like dig ditches or something like that. I don't know. DePerno and Renton are among 9 people in Michigan named thus far by Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel's office as having been involved in the scheme. Asked whether the broader investigation continues, Hilson replied in an email, quote, "Still more to come unrelated to the individuals currently charged," end of quote. I'm enjoying this. I am thoroughly enjoying this. Hilson has been considering charges since September. He convened a grand jury in March to determine whether criminal indictments should be issued, according to court documents. In his statement, Hilson said the charges against DePerno and Renton were authorized by, quote, "an independent citizens grand jury," end of quote, and that his office did not make any recommendations. So, once again, it's not the prosecutor, it's not the attorney general, it's a grand jury saying, we saw the evidence, we've heard the testimony, charges need to be filed. The charges come the same day that Trump was charged by the U.S. Justice Department with conspiracy to defraud the United States and other counts as part of his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. In Michigan, 5 vote tabulators were illegally taken from 3 counties and brought to a hotel room. That's according to documents released last year by Attorney General Nessel's office. Investigators found that the tabulators were broken into and tests were performed on the equipment. DePerno was named as a prime instigator in the case. Because Nessel ran against DePerno in 2022, her office cited a conflict of interest and requested a special prosecutor. The prosecuting attorney's coordinating counsel appointed Hilson to the case. Charges were slow in coming, in part because prosecutors wanted clarification from a judge about what constitutes illegal possession of a voting machine. Some of the defendants argued that local clerks gave them permission to take the machines. A state judge ruled last month that it is a felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison, to take a machine without a court order or permission directly from the Secretary of State's office. So there's going to be more charges coming, and I'm going to love it. In a separate investigation, Nessel announced 8 criminal charges each last month against 16 Republicans who she said submitted false certificates as electors for Donald Trump in Michigan, a state Joe Biden won. The article refers to Trump as then president. Once again, we don't refer to Trump as president now, then, or ever. The charges include forgery and conspiracy to commit election forgery. The group includes the head of the Republican National Committee's chapter in Michigan, Kathy Burden, and the former co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, Michonne Maddock, who's also the wife of a sitting state representative. Maddock pleaded not guilty at her arraignment last Thursday. Burden is set to be arraigned on August 10th, along with several other people, including a guy from Ottawa County who was involved in this scheme. Throw the book at them all. Throw the book at all of them. Right now, let's go ahead and get into our next story here. This is Zach Coleman and Holly Otterbein writing for Politico. This is dated July 19th. President Joe Biden and United Auto Workers leader Shawn Fain met at the White House. A union official and a White House aide told Politico as labor contract discussions are beginning between the powerful union and the big 3 automakers. The meeting comes as Democratic officials and labor observers brace for a likely strike by the UAW, which could have major economic and political ramifications. It also took place in the shadow of the UAW withholding its support from the president's re-election campaign for the time being due to its concerns over his handling of the electric vehicle transition. UAW spokesperson Jonah Furman told Politico that Fain asked for Biden's support in contract talks with GM, Ford, and Stellantis. For those of you that don't know, Stellantis is the parent company of Dodge Chrysler G Fiat. Furman said Fain asked Biden to use his bully pulpit and pushed him to attach stronger labor provisions to federal grants and loans funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. UAW's contract with the car companies ends September 14th. A White House official said that UAW asked to set up a meeting with Biden's senior staff so that they could present their positions on the labor negotiations with the automakers. The official said that when Biden heard about the meeting, he asked if he could speak with Fain privately. The two had a short discussion. The meeting with top aides and UAW included Gene Sperling, who Biden has tapped as a point person on talks between the UAW and the big three automakers. Fain declined to comment on specifics of the meeting with Biden. Fain told reporters after a meeting with the Congressional Labor Caucus on Wednesday from a couple of weeks ago, quote, "We're just trying to do the right thing for our members right now," end of quote. Fain said he was on Capitol Hill to tell lawmakers, quote, "Where we are, what our members' issues are, and what needs to happen as the auto industry moves forward. It's a very uneven playing field right now. The companies have been very profitable for a decade, $250 billion in profits, and our workers have regressed, so we've got to do better," end of quote. The UAW has prodded Biden publicly over provisions in funding from the IRA, which is key to his political, economic, and climate agenda. The union took aim at $9.2 billion in loans awarded to Ford last month, criticizing taxpayer support flowing to states with less favorable organizing rights like Kentucky and Tennessee. Senator Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan, who met with Fain on Wednesday, said in an interview, quote, "Fain knows that President Biden is one of the most pro-union presidents that we've had in this country." Oh, really? Yeah, ask the railroad workers what they think about that statement. Continuing the quote, "But clearly President Fain is focused on an aggressive negotiation for his members," end of quote. Biden has made shifting to electric vehicles a central part of his climate and economic strategy. He has sought to make all new vehicle sales electric by 2030, and his EPA has proposed vehicle standards that would require 67% of new vehicle sales to be zero emissions by 2032. The auto union has said it supports the transition to electric vehicles, but is concerned about the quality of jobs in the emerging sector. The UAW has acknowledged the market is trending toward electric vehicles, but it has said the new federal funding contains too few provisions to encourage better standards for workers in the emerging batteries industry that will be central to electric vehicle employment. Much of the UAW's anxiety stems from transitioning out of factories where union members work on internal combustion engines to the emerging battery sector. But the U.S. battery industry is nascent and therefore has little connection to organized labor. GM and Stellantis said in response to questions from Politico that they support workers' rights to organize, including at facilities where joint ventures exist with other companies. Really? Ford did not immediately return a request for comment. GM spokesperson Janine Ginnivan said in a statement, quote, "We believe the UAW, given their historic and constructive relationship in the automotive industry, would be well positioned to represent the workforce," end of quote. That's corporate blowing smoke up the union's ass. And I'm sorry, union members aren't going to play that game. They're not going to buy it. Fain is also meeting with House members and senators over the next couple of days, according to multiple congressional aides and members. Some lawmakers have shared the UAW's worries that the Biden administration has not done enough to convince auto companies to improve standards for workers. Representative Dan Kildee, Democrat of Michigan, who has GM facilities in his district, said in an interview, quote, "I was disappointed in some of the deployment of that initial investment. I want to see more in Michigan, and I want to see more on existing factory sites or existing facilities where we have a history of UAW contracts," end of quote. That's right. I tell you what, if the UAW goes on strike, Biden better support them. Because I tell you what, if he f***s them like he did the railroad workers, I guarantee the unions will not back Biden. They'll stay home. Or they'll find a third-party candidate. I guarantee it. Workers are fed up, period. And it's not just in auto, it's not just in rail, it's everywhere. It's in the fast food industry. I'm hearing about pushback in the strip club industry from featured dancers, and that might be a subject that I get into on a future show. But right now, let's go ahead to our next topic here. This is Paul Egan writing for the Detroit Free Press. This is dated August 1st out of Lansing. This is an update to a story that we told you last week. The Board of State Canvassers on Tuesday rejected proposed recall petitions against 6 Democratic and 1 Republican state lawmaker after citing numerous concerns about the petitions, including lack of clarity, lack of information about who is coordinating the efforts, and illegible handwriting. Only 1 recall petition was approved against State Representative Cam Cavett, Republican of Sheboygan. While the other recall petitions cited only each lawmaker's vote on a numbered bill with no explanation of what the bill was about, the Cavett petition cited his vote on the election of the House Speaker. The board, made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, agreed unanimously that wording was sufficiently clear. The 6 Democrats targeted for recall were Representative Noah Arbit of West Bloomfield, Jamie Churches of Wyandotte, Betsy Kafia of Traverse City, Jennifer Conlon of Ann Arbor, Sharon McDonald of Troy, and Reggie Miller of Van Buren Township. The bills cited related to gun legislation and a proposed hate crime law. Besides Cavett, the Republican targeted for recall was Representative Donnie Steele of Orion Township for a vote on a sentencing bill related to gun legislation. The 7 rejected recall petitions were all on the basis of 2-2 votes on whether the wording of the petitions were sufficiently clear. The board often splits along partisan lines. This time, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican member, Jeanette Bradshaw and Tony Daunt respectively, said the wording was sufficiently clear. 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, Chair Mary Ellen Gurwitz and Richard Hauskamp respectively, said the wording was not sufficiently clear. Since 3 votes are needed to approve a petition, the tie of votes resulted in rejection. Bradshaw said her concerns related not to whether the reasons for the recalls were stated clearly enough, but whether the handwritten reasons were easy enough to read. She says she supported the Cavett petition because its handwriting was more legible than the other ones. Daunt said his main concern was the lack of a disclaimer showing who was coordinating and financially backing the petitions, which all were submitted at about the same time and had nearly identical wording except for the name of the lawmaker targeted, the bill number, and the date of the referenced vote. Each was signed by a resident of each lawmaker's district, but the handwriting on all the petitions looked similar. Attorney Mark Brewer, who has been a past guest on the show when he was the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, appeared on behalf of the targeted Democrats. He told the board the petitions were ghostwritten and disclosures are required on who is funding the recall efforts. Hauskamp expressed similar concerns, questioning whether divine intervention resulted in several residents in different parts of the state all being inspired to write similar recall petitions at the same time. But the board received legal advice that the disclaimer issue is a campaign finance issue for the Secretary of State to handle and not a basis for them to reject a petition at this stage of the process. You know what I say to that? Bullshit. According to Brewer, the Bureau of Elections was told that the contact for several of the petitions is Frank Tarnowski, a former Wyandotte School Board trustee who also ran for the State House and for Wyandotte Mayor. Tarnowski could not immediately be reached for comment. Only 1 person who signed a recall petition appeared before the board Tuesday, and he said he can't identify any specific group that is financially backing the effort. Gerald Clixby of West Bloomfield, who signed the recall petition targeting Arbit over the hate crimes bill, said, quote, "This is a real grassroots movement," end of quotes. Really? With the same language on 7 petitions? Come on. He said he has met with a number of groups, some more organized than others, but he is not aware of any single group providing a bankroll. When pressed by Hauskamp, Clixby said among the groups he is involved with are the Michigan Conservative Union and the Michigan Conservative Coalition and some Tea Party groups. I didn't know there were any left. He said, quote, "I know a lot of these people," end of quote, and many of them are upset about Arbit's bill and other legislative actions. State campaign finance records show Clixby has donated to many conservative or Republican candidates and causes, including $2,650 he gave to the Grand New Party this year. That's a far-right offshoot of the Republican Party. Among Michigan lawmakers active in the Grand New Party is State Representative Matt Maddock, Republican of Milford, who has received more than $3,000 in donations from Clixby. Once again, Matt Maddock is the husband of former Michigan Republican Party co-chair Michonne Maddock, who's charged in the fake elector scheme. Recalling a lawmaker is difficult in Michigan, and no lawmaker has been successfully recalled since 2011, when Republican Representative Paul Scott of Grand Blanc was narrowly ousted in an effort backed by the Michigan Education Association. After that, Michigan revamped its recall laws in 2012 under former Republican Governor Rick Snyder, yes, the stuffed turd, to place higher hurdles in the way of a successful recall effort. The recall petition targeting Cavett is valid for 180 days, but sponsors must collect nearly 12,000 valid signatures from voters in his district within a 60-day period. Backers of the rejected petitions have the option of returning to the board with wording that provides some information about the referenced bills. So there you go. Hopefully they just decide that they've had enough and they're just going to sit home, because most of them probably don't know how to write or read, because, once again, conservatives target education because they want your children to be just as dumb or dumber than they are. All right, let's go ahead to our next topic.
Stop! Hammer time!
Uh-oh, it's hammer time. It is time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. We've got 2 winners for you this week, so every time we have 2 winners, we let Wade Garrett chime in.
The double douche.
Who is that guy?
Gentlemen, Wade Garrett.
Holy sh**.
Exactly right.
Yeah, Wade Garrett serves up on a platter this week. Winner number 1, Republican North Carolina lawmaker Tricia Cotham. Why? Because she switched from the Democratic Party to join the Savages. This is John L. Dorman writing for Business Insider. This is dated July 30th. In 2022, Tricia Cotham mulled over the possibility of a return to the North Carolina House of Representatives, where she had served as a Democratic lawmaker from 2007 to 2017. While Cotham was a familiar face to Democrats in the Charlotte area, local activists didn't realize she was seriously considering coming back to the legislature until she filed for the Democratic primary shortly before last year's filing deadline. Once Cotham won the primary, many Democrats reached out to her, hoping to aid the general election campaign of a longtime friend. But according to a report published by the New York Times, their calls and messages largely went unanswered. Shortly after Cotham rejoined the legislature in January, she soon felt discontent within the House Democratic caucus, remarking on the political pressure exerted on the group as they were the last line of defense against legislative Republicans overriding the vetoes of 2-term Governor Roy Cooper, a fellow Democrat. And then Cotham in April made a decision that immediately transformed North Carolina politics as she switched from the Democratic Party to the Republicans, giving the latter party supermajorities in both the state House and state Senate. Democrats were outraged, as they should have been, as they had welcomed back into their fold a longtime colleague who just 3 months into her new term had flipped parties. And Republicans were thrilled with their newfound power, ribbing Democrats for not working more effectively with Cotham and vowing major changes on everything from abortion rights to education reform. What was previously unknown until now was that top North Carolina Republicans, mainly House Speaker Tim Moore and House Majority Leader John Bell, had encouraged Cotham to run for the seat last year. That is, again, according to an article published by the New York Times. Such a push by members of the opposing party to prod a candidate into running for office would be seen as a rarity in American politics, and especially in North Carolina, which over the past decade has been home to some of the fiercest political battles over gerrymandering, voting rights, and election administration. But Bell told the New York Times that Cotham was an effective member when she previously served. He told the newspaper, quote, "I encouraged her to run because she was a really good member when she served before." End of quote. Oh, really? No, we've seen this before, but we saw it in Michigan. Back in 2012, within the first week that we first started airing Southpaws on terrestrial radio, the big story we were covering then, and Mark Brewer, who we had mentioned in an earlier article, was a special guest on our show as the Michigan Democratic Party chair at the time, State Representative Roy Schmidt from the west side of Grand Rapids secretly switched from the Democratic Party to the Republicans just a day or two after a spaghetti fundraising dinner was held at the International Association of Firefighters Hall on Fuller Avenue, right by Knapp. I remember it well. By the way, Roy not only flipped as a Republican, he also got his nephew's best friend to run against him as a fake Democrat. Well, when everything got exposed, and by the way, there's video proof of this, that's when Winnie Brinks got elected to the state house. And now Winnie Brinks is the Senate Majority Leader in Michigan. And I love it. It's great. And Roy Schmidt hasn't done a thing in politics since then. Well, he hasn't done much of anything since then noteworthy other than getting his house raided for all the pot plants that he had. That was before pot was legal in Michigan. Oh, Roy. Oh, by the way, when Roy switched, it was at the behest of the then leader of the Michigan State House, who was a Republican. I can't remember his name. Now listen to this. Cotham just last year campaigned on a platform backing abortion rights, but after her party switch, she voted for a 12-week abortion ban that was vetoed by Cooper, but overridden by the legislature courtesy of her vote. And after she ran as an ally of the LGBTQ plus community, she voted to ban transgender girls from participating on girls' sports teams. Before Cotham flipped to the GOP, she was reportedly frustrated over the politics behind key gun rights vote, as she had an important doctor's appointment and missed the actual vote, which contributed to its passage. After Cotham received criticism that she felt was unfair, she switched parties just days later. Jonathan Colby, Cotham's former campaign consultant, told the New York Times that Cotham was irate over her political predicament. He told the Times, quote, she said, "I'm either going to switch parties or resign. The things she was telling me then were like, the Democrats don't like me, the Republicans have helped me out a lot and have been nice to me," end of quote. Well, she's a traitor. She's a traitor to her gender, and she's a traitor to the Democrats. This is why I keep harping every time on this show that Big Tent doesn't work for the Democratic Party. You need to purge, totally purge, get rid of anybody who's a homophobe, who is a transphobe, who is pro-forced birth. Get rid of them. If they want to be savages, they can go to the Republican Party gleefully. I will show them the door. I will kick them in the ass as they're leaving the door. That's what Democrats need to do, but they refuse to do so. This is why I don't give the Democrats money. I said it years ago. Not another goddamn penny, and I mean every single word of it. Vote blue no matter who is bullshit. This is one reason why. Manchin in West Virginia is another reason why. Cinema in Arizona is another reason why. You need to have progressives. You need to push progressive candidates. Period. End of story. So winner number 1 is Tricia Cotham. Winner number 2, for the first time in the 11-and-a-half-year history of this show, we are awarding Douchebag of the Week to a dead person. Winner number 2, the late Democratic Representative John Dingell from Michigan. I have this story. This is John L. Dorman writing for Business Insider. This is dated July 30th. The late Democrat Representative John Dingell of Michigan, an institution in U.S. politics who served in Congress from 1955 to 2015, played a significant role in enacting countless pieces of legislation over the course of generations, with his eye always on the constituents that he represented in his Detroit area district. But a trove of documents recently examined by the New York Times also reveals the role that Dingell played in the rise of the National Rifle Association's political influence beginning in the 1970s, with the congressman's efforts playing a major role in the development of the organization's lobbying outfit. In a 1975 memo obtained by the New York Times, where he outlined how the NRA could become a force on Capitol Hill, Dingell wrote, quote, "An organization with as many members and as many potential resources, both financial and influential within its ranks, should not have to go second or third class in a fight for survival. It should go first class." End of quote. In addition to his congressional work, Dingell for years also served on the board of the NRA, stepping down in 1994 after supporting that year's highly consequential crime bill, which included the landmark assault weapons ban that was overwhelmingly supported by most Democrats and vehemently opposed by Republicans. Although Dingell voted for the crime bill after intense lobbying from then-President Bill Clinton, the congressman almost immediately sought ways to repeal the assault weapons provision after the larger bill was signed into law. Again, that is according to the New York Times. In that year's midterm elections, Republicans flipped both houses of Congress, fueled in part by intense opposition to gun control in a slew of rural districts anchored in the Midwest and South. As Dingell's staff pondered a potential repeal push in a 1995 memo, they also realized that, quote, "a solid explanation will have to be made to the majority of our voters who favor gun control," end of quote. Representative Debbie Dingell, who succeeded her husband in Congress in 2015, told the New York Times that the congressman needed police protection for several months after the assault weapons ban went on the books. The ban expired in September 2004 and has yet to be renewed. She told the newspaper, quote, "We had people scream and yell at us. It was the first time I had seen that real hate," end of quote. John Dingell continued to have talks with the NRA over gun policy throughout the rest of his career, notably after the 1999 mass shooting at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and the 2012 mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. But according to Debbie Dingell, her late husband's views on the NRA and guns had shifted during his nearly 60-year political career. The congresswoman told the Times, quote, "I can't tell you how many nights I heard him talking to people about how the NRA was going too far, how they didn't understand the times. He was a deep believer in the Second Amendment, and at the end he still deeply believed, but he also saw the world was changing," end of quote. John Dingell died in February 2019. He was 92 years old. So there you go. Again, another reason you vote for progressives. You run progressive candidates, Democratic Party, because they'll win. They'll win every time. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, John Fetterman, they will win every single time. Period. End of story. So to Tricia Cotham and to John Dingell, we have this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag!
Oh, yeah, you got that right. Hey, Tricia, you know the Republicans are going to want to send you back into the kitchen barefoot and pregnant, all right? Because that's what they do. Sorry, got news for you. Oh, my God. I can't believe we finally had to give Douchebag of the Week to a dead person. Unbelievable. Well, I tell you what, let's go on to our next topic here. Uh-oh. Hold on. You know what that music means. It's time for another episode. And now, Hawker and Ramble present As Ottawa County Turns. Brought to you by Huff's Facial Tissues. Use it to wipe your nose after you've been huffing gasoline or after you've been snorting cocaine. Hey, I just read the copy. I'm not endorsing anything. All right. Let's get to this story. This is Sarah Leach writing for the Holland Sentinel. This is dated July 25th. The deputy administrator for Ottawa County has resigned, marking another significant departure in county government since the Ottawa Impact-led Board of Commissioners took over in January. Patrick Waterman, who joined Ottawa County in November 2022, submitted his resignation letter on Monday, July 24th. In a letter to department heads, he cited a strained working relationship with new administrator John Gibbs. The resignation is effective Friday, August 4th, according to the letter which was provided to the Holland Sentinel. Waterman wrote, quote, I am sad to share that today I submitted my resignation letter to Administrator Gibbs effective August 4th, 2023. Despite my best efforts, I have been unable to establish an effective working relationship with Mr. Gibbs over the past 7 months. I do not feel as though my experience and abilities are valued or utilized by the current administration and have come to the decision that it is time to move on. End of quote. In his formal resignation letter, Waterman said his decision, quote, stems from a deep concern regarding what I have viewed to be a lack of effective leadership and an eroding culture of employee trust and support within the county. End of quote. He said he believes open communication and effective leadership are, quote, the backbone of any successful organization, end of quote, and that when employees are heard, supported, and guided, they're more likely to remain motivated and committed. Quote, sadly, from what I have experienced, this is not currently the culture at Ottawa County, end of quote. Waterman further alleged Gibbs uninvited him from key department meetings, failed to adhere to established county hiring policies and practices, ignored concerns and objections regarding a new senior aide position, and overall failed to provide an opportunity for Waterman to contribute on initiatives, quote, with which I am experienced, end of quote. John Gibbs was installed on January 3rd after the new Ottawa Impact majority fired previous administrator John Shea. Gibbs was previously a software engineer and Christian missionary, then a political appointee and advisor under Donald Trump's U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He ran as the Republican nominee for Michigan's 3rd Congressional District in 2022, losing by 13 points to Democrat Hillary Scholten. Yeah, Scholten kicked his ass. In February, Commissioner Jacob Bonema, formerly affiliated with Ottawa Impact, filed a human resources complaint against Gibbs following a dispute before a board meeting. An independent investigation found no further action was warranted, but OI founders Joe Moss and Sylvia Rodea pushed through a formal censure of Bonema for filing the complaint. Bonema released a short statement Tuesday thanking Waterman for his service. Quote, Patrick's talents will be sorely missed. I wish him and his family only the best. Hopefully his departure will force some meaningful reflection and conversation that we can all learn from. Retaining competency and expertise in Ottawa County should be given the highest priority. End of quote. Ottawa Impact, which currently holds a 6-member majority on the board, is a far-right fundamentalist group that formed in 2021 after clashes with the county and state over COVID-19 mitigation measures. In his letter to department heads, Waterman said he's accepted a position as deputy city manager for the city of Wyoming, where Shea was hired as city manager in April. It's unclear how Gibbs' administration plans to move forward. In March, the OI majority approved hiring a senior executive aide for him after he likened the administrator job to, quote, drinking from a fire hose, end of quote. As of Monday, July 25th, that position has not been filled. And to our knowledge, it hasn't been filled as the time that we are recording this show. So there you go. The ship is sinking. The rats are abandoning ship. What do you expect? Well, that music means it's time to go on. And maybe we'll have another episode next week.
Join us again soon for another edition of As Ottawa County Turns.
Not soon enough.
This program is produced for Big D Entertainment. Stay tuned for the Edge of Blight over most of these stations.
I still haven't seen an episode of The Edge of Blight. Oh boy. I want to get to one final story. This is Dan Mangan writing for CNBC. This is dated August 2nd. See, Donald Trump isn't the only evil, violent conservative traitor that's been raided by the feds. Federal law enforcement agents executed a search warrant on World Wrestling Entertainment boss Vince McMahon last month and served him with a federal grand jury subpoena, the company disclosed Wednesday. The actions represent an escalation of an ongoing investigation into allegations that McMahon paid millions of dollars over the years to women after being accused of sexual misconduct. WWE also revealed Wednesday that McMahon, quote, went on medical leave after undergoing major spinal surgery, end of quote. McMahon's leave began July 21st, and he will, quote, remain on medical leave until further notice, but will remain executive chairman, end of quote, of WWE. That's according to a quarterly report that the company filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Reached for comment Wednesday, the company said it believes the subpoena and search warrant are, quote, a continuation of the investigation that commenced last summer. WWE has cooperated throughout and fully understands and respects the government's needs for a complete process. End of quote. Really? In a separate statement, McMahon told CNBC, quote, I have always denied any intentional wrongdoing and continue to do so. I am confident that the government's investigation will be resolved without any findings of wrongdoing. End of quote. That's my Vince McMahon impersonation. The search warrant and subpoena on July 17th came a year after news first broke that federal prosecutors and the Securities and Exchange Commission were investigating WWE and McMahon over his payments to women. WWE noted in the SEC filing Wednesday that it, quote, has received voluntary and compulsory legal demands for documents, including from federal law enforcement and regulatory agencies concerning the investigation and related subject matters, end of quote. McMahon's wife, Linda, who previously was the CEO of WWE, served in Donald Trump's cabinet as administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration. McMahon's federal search warrant and grand jury subpoena were disclosed just a day after Trump, a longtime friend of McMahon's, was indicted by a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. on felony charges related to his efforts to reverse his loss in the 2020 presidential election. WWE on Wednesday said that during the 3 and 6 months ended June 30th, quote, the company incurred $5.3 million and $7.1 million, respectively, of expenses related to costs incurred, end of quote, in connection with a separate investigation by a special committee created by the company's board. The company said that McMahon has agreed to reimburse WWE for, quote, all reasonable costs incurred in connection, end of quote, with the special committee's work. The filing said, quote, to date, Mr. McMahon has paid approximately $17.4 million to reimburse the company for costs that have been incurred and paid by the company, end of quote. It's not clear how much more McMahon will have to reimburse WWE beyond that amount. The company said, quote, as previously disclosed, the special committee investigation was completed during the fourth quarter of 2022. However, related government investigations remain ongoing, end of quote. So there you go, folks. This is karmic justice for McMahon putting the other promoters of professional wrestling out of business. I'm sure that Ole Anderson is sitting somewhere in North Carolina laughing his ass off about this. I hope he's having a great time. Folks, that does it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.